My name is Esther Canar. I was born at midnight at 2428 Hamilton Street at my grandfather and grandmother's house, Mendel and Vittel Hertzberg. It was a wonderful street as I grew up. Our home was at 3211 Hamilton Street. So my mother and my sister and I would walk down and be with my grandparents a great deal of the time. The Hamilton Street had many Jewish residents. Next door to my grandfather and grandmother was Johnny Rosenblatt's family. And my grandfather didn't like to have me play, let me play with Johnny, that baseball bum, which later proved to him to be wrong. Down the street was a family by the name of Berman, who Ann Roystein is her name now, and we played together as little kids. And down further was a wonderful duplex with the Rosenbaum family. And Mitchell Rosenbaum had a long beard, a long white beard. It was simply gorgeous. Across the street, in later years, lived my Aunt Rose and Abe Hoffman. What was then known as the Bud. I suppose it was a bathhouse that had little apartments. It was a very interesting place. As I don't know how to go on from there other than to tell you that on Saturday nights, my Aunt Ann Steinberg, my Aunt Toby Kagan, my mother and I, and my sister Genevieve would stand. One of the sisters, I think Ann, played the piano, and we would all on Saturday night stand around and sing, have dinner at this elaborate little house that my grandfather and grandmother lived in. You should have seen that house at Pesach. There weren't two dishes that matched. My grandfather sat on a nesebet, which is today called a love seat with pillows, and it went on and on and on, but we little kids all knew to pay respect to my grandfather and grandmother Hertzberg. And so as we grew up, it was a very loving family. Actually, my grandparents' name was not Hertzberg. The name was Auerbach. And my grandfather and grandmother, my grandfather had 3 sons before he came to this country with his first marriage. Then he married my grandmother, Vittel, and my mother was from that union. When they came to the United States, 2 of my grandfather's sons had something wrong with their eyes, and they were not allowed to come into the country. So my grandfather had to send them back to their maternal grandmother, and I believe it was in Frankfurt, Germany. My mother and her brother Joe, and my grandmother and grandfather, and I don't know how, came to Omaha, and this is where they dwelled. Now these 2 boys were raised in Germany and became immensely wealthy. In 1933, and they always kept in contact with my grandfather and grandmother, and they went into the bottling business, somewhat like the Reiches family. And we used to get pictures of them being in San Moritz, vacationing. They lived the life of Riley. In 1933, they were told by Hindenburg to get out. And they were wise enough to take their money and their respective families, and they moved to what was then Palestine. In 1934, when I was a senior, I was at university, my grandfather and grandmother went to what was then Palestine for Pesach. And my grandmother was simply amazed. They had two sets of sterling for Pesach. That's how wealthy they were. And they had invested their money in orchards, which the Arabs did burn down and cost them a lot of money. while my grandfather and grandmother took the SS Washington to Israel, to Palestine, there were riots that broke out in Palestine, and my grandfather was very frightened, and they returned back to Omaha. In later years, my husband and I went to Israel to see the family, and all they could reminisce about were their wonderful years in Germany, where they led a very luxurious life. And Lenny, my one of the who would have been my aunt, said to Max and I, "Life is as schwer in Israel," and it was true. I met my husband when I was 16 years old and came down to Lincoln, Nebraska, to the SAM house. And a boy that my family had known all through the years by the name of David Goldware introduced me to Max. We were married when I was 21, and life was not easy to begin with. My husband worked for his uncle, Leo Fox. The Canars were a family who were very well established in South Omaha. And my father-in-law had a furniture store, which my mother-in-law and father-in-law both worked in. Their life was a different way of life, because they came when they were newly married, and life, of course, was very difficult. And at that time, apparently, there were like 10,000 Jews living in South Omaha. They were a town unto themselves. My father-in-law used to say, when Hayes picked him up in New York and dropped the different Jewish people all over the United States, why didn't they drop him off in Texas, where it was warm? And the amazing thing, they came to Omaha knowing no one. They were dropped off in South Omaha. They took my father-in-law the next day after being in Omaha to the packing house. And what is your name? And apparently it was not Canar. It was probably some a name closely knitted to it. And they stamped a stamp and said, "You are in the packing house to work, and you're a registered Republican." Isn't that amazing? And they did it very well. My father-in-law peddled, and the story goes, they lived in a small house on about 22nd and N, in a little house. And when my father-in-law was peddling apples, and it got cold, they had to take all the furniture out of this little house, put all the apples in the house to preserve, so he could make a living the next day and put the apples back in the truck or whatever it was. Their life, as I say, was entirely different than my young life. My father came to this country as a young boy of 16 years old. Naturally, he came because he broke away from his family wanted him to come because of the pogroms in Russia. He decided to go to dental school, but couldn't stand the sight of blood, and that was not for him. Why he came to Omaha, I really don't know if he knew any family. He never saw his parents again. And my grandfather and grandmother Hertzberg were his parents. He was simply marvelous to them. And my dad was a very, very kind, gentle man. His family was the most important thing in his life. I don't know how much more where you wanted me to go on from there, Ben.
I'd like you to tell me as much as you can about your grandparents.
Oh. I had never seen anybody like Philip. I don't know where my mother and father went, but I was about 4 or 5 years old. And my grandmother and grandfather were very religious. I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning. I had spent the night with my grandparents, and I saw this man with the, what do they call it? The piece up here on his forehead and all the winding around on his arms, and I absolutely was frightened to death. He was a very well-respected man. Anyway, he used to take a shot of whiskey after he davened, put on his coat, and walk to 25th and Seward, to the Shilachal there, where he was the shamus. They were they were very dear. Their lives were not as complicated as our lives were today. My grandfather would think nothing, as there were only two of us that drove, my Aunt Ann and I, in this family. And my grandfather would think nothing of calling up and saying, Esther, Grandma has to have a new hat for Yontif, and Annie can't drive today, so you take her. It wasn't a question of whether we were busy, whether we had anything to do, never bothered him a bit. And he did rule the roost. He was the head of the family and very highly respected. He also, as my mother used to say, was a witness at divorces, which was, I guess, considered a very respectful part of my grandfather's life and the kind of man he was. He never made a living. There was, on 24th Street, from Hamilton to Charles down to the Star Store, were a whole group of Jewish families that made their living. On the corner of 24th and Hamilton was a place called Flax's store, and in that store was a big tank. Mrs. Resnick had a fish tank. I was absolutely petrified. My grandfather had a grocery store there. How he maintained it, I don't know. My Uncle Sam Steinberg, who had the Omaha Potato Market, and my father, who had a automobile place, were his delivery boys. He would call them up and never thought a thing about bothering them. And Sam, Dave, get down here, I have to have a delivery made. Across the street from Grandpa's place was Walk's tailor shop. All the way to, and then further down the street was Himmelstein's Bakery, was what was their name that had corned beef? Oh, the aromas down that block with the smell of corned beef and all the the smell of dill pickles. It was absolutely fascinating to a little girl like me. And my grandfather's nephew, Herman Auerbach, took me to the Star Store all the way down 24th Street and bought me a watch. I thought he was the most wonderful man that ever lived. I think my grandfather lived to be 86 years old. And after he passed away, he went to live with my Aunt Toby Kagan. But there was a respect for all of us with my grandfather and grandmother. Today, when I think of what children get, and we would sit around the Seder table, and Grandpa would give us a nickel apiece. We thought that was just wonderful. But the whole family had a great respect for him. I can't think of anything more that would clearly picture the kind of man he was. And my grandmother was a very dutiful housewife. Then, in later years, my aunt and Uncle Sam Steinberg lived on the corner, no, first we lived, Max and I lived on 51st, right off of Dodge Street. And at the other corner lived Ann and Sam Steinberg, who were my uncle and aunt. We would then keep up the traditions of the family, and between us, the ones who, nobody would ride at that time to go to Bethel, we would have different members of the family living with us, or not living with us, staying with us over the holiday. Between my Aunt Ann Steinberg, who was the loveliest lady that ever lived, I should say about her, the kind of woman, before she married Sam, in this little house that Grandpa and Grandma Hertzberg lived in, she put in a new furnace, she painted the house. She couldn't get married till they were living comfortably.
You mentioned that your grandfather had 3 sons,
Yeah,
and 2 of them were not allowed into the country.
no.
How about the 3rd son?
Oh, the third son was my Uncle Joe.
Okay.
And he really never made a living either. He lived in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and he was married to a wonderful lady by the name of Frida Rubin, who was a family of the Rubins. There was a Rubin family here. I'm trying to think. Did you know Dr. Ronnie Rubin? Well, that was the family, and that my Aunt Frida came from. Whether they all emanated from Fort Dodge, I really can't say. But in later years, my Aunt Frida and Uncle Joe came to Omaha, and they had 2 sons and a daughter. Julia, who married Abe, I can't think of his name, and Lowell Hertzberg, who lives in Newport Beach, California, and Lowell and Alvin Hertzberg, who lived in right out of Los Angeles. Alvin has since passed away, but Lowell has 2 boys who run a fixture place, lighting fixture place in Newport. And my cousin Julia passed away. She married a man from Council Bluffs, and they were in the automobile business too. Rabin, Meyer Rabin. Do you remember the Rabins? Well, anyway, they have all passed away, and we have lost touch with all of Julian Meyer's children. But I see Lowell and Barbara in Palm Springs in the summertime. And I always kept in touch with Alvin. The other 2 uncles of mine who had made so much money, they're out of, I can't tell you their names because I only knew them as Hebrew or Jewish names. It's a shame that my Aunt Toby Kagan didn't record some of this. One of the boys, one of their grandsons, is with a very religious sect someplace outside of Jerusalem. And his sister lives in L.A., and Lowell and Barbara Hertzberg are friendly with her. But when I tried to make contact, she wasn't interested, so I never did get to meet her. I have a son, Mike, who's a judge in Sacramento, and I have a daughter, Ellen Joseph, living here in Omaha. My granddaughter, Rachel, has always been very interested in Israel. When she graduated from high school, she made up her mind she was going to live a year in Israel. We were just sick. but she went and got a year's education at the university in Tel Aviv, and when she entered university here in the United States in Santa Cruz, they gave her a year's credit for it. After she graduated from Santa Cruz, she did some work for Hillel in Santa Cruz and then in Eugene, Oregon. She now is the junior director of the New Israel Fund in San Francisco. And it astounds me the kind of money that is raised from this New Israel Fund. Their benefactors run from $25,000 to $250,000. Last year, one of the fundraisers, it was $250 to attend the fundraiser. Madeleine Albright was the speaker. In New York, Clinton was the speaker. $500,000 to attend. I mean, $5,000 to it. Yeah, $500 to attend, and the money they raise is just phenomenal. What they do, Israel submits to the New Israel Fund what they want money for. And then the committee of the New Israel Fund decides which one of the programs they want to fund. They do a remarkable job, and I'm very, very proud of her for what her leanings are and how terribly involved she is in Jewish, everything Jewish. In today's world, I think it's very unusual when fundraising is so difficult in any area for a young lady to be involved the way Rachel is. Now, I don't know how much more you want, Ben.
How many grandchildren in all do you have?
One.
Just one?
One.
Tell me about your son.
My son is, well, when he graduated from university, which took quite some time, when he graduated as a lawyer, he left school. I know he left school without finishing the 4 years. I think he had a year and a half left, and decided that he just didn't want to go to school anymore. And in those days, you got out of high school and you immediately went to it was unusual for children not to go through, at least the people we knew, not to have a child finish their university education. And Mike went to working for Max as a salesman, and he was wonderful at it. But I don't think he ever was happy in that kind of work. He married a young lady by the name of Deanne. Shapiro, Morris and Claire Shapiro's daughter. And they lived in Chicago for a while, and then they came back, and Mike and Deanne both decided that they wanted to go back to school. Rachel was all of about 9 months old, and I took her for about a month, and they moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, where Mike went on with his education. He graduated law school when he was about 33, 34 years old, and because he had to make up time to finish his university education. He went to work for the NLRB in Washington and loved it. But in the meantime, Mike and Deanne were divorced. Deanne remained in Lincoln, and she also got a law degree. Then Deanne and Rachel moved to Sacramento, and Mike, not wanting to be separated from his daughter, decided to move to Sacramento. And for a while worked as, he left the government and went to work in private practice. But he really wasn't happy with it, and finally decided to go back he passed, I don't know what it is, civil service in Sacramento, and started working for the state. And I imagine it's been about 10 years that he's been a judge. He often teaches labor law for students, and has really had a wonderful life living in Sacramento. He is about to retire and wants to move to, he and his wife Linda want to move to Santa Ana. My granddaughter, as I say, is in San Francisco, so they're not too far apart. My daughter Ellen worked for Luxottica, which is an eyewear company, for 17 years, and had traveled on the road for that many years. And last year, she really lost her job with them, which I thought was about time, and has had great difficulty finding the kind of work. She has a master's degree in social services. She has been working at the Marriott, but she's starting a new job with AAA. And I hope it will be a better beginning for her than, she hasn't been as, well, she's more ambitious than working at the Marriott. And hopefully this will prove beneficial for her. And as for my own life,
I want to go back, Esther, and hear about all your school days.
well, I had 2 years at the University of Nebraska.
No, let's go back further.
Oh, further. Well, I went to Franklin School on 33rd. We lived, as I said, at 3211 Hamilton Street, and that was a Jewish neighborhood. We had Jewish neighbors. Our neighborhood, our house abutted the Muskin house, Stuart Muskin's, and his brother Leonard and his sister Dorothy. And I played baseball with those boys and loved every minute of it. Down the street in later years, lived on Lafayette, lived Tybee Blank, who was Rose Muskin's sister. That was the Meyer family. And across the street practically lived my Aunt Rose and Uncle Abe. Then over on the next block on Myrtle lived the Kirschenbaums. And it was a real Jewish neighborhood. When I went to the University of Nebraska, I became a Sigma Delta Tau at University of Nebraska. I think we had all of 12 or 13 girls in the house, one bathroom. We had to sign for showers on Saturday night. We had more fun. It was a very delightful, homey atmosphere. Nobody had any money. Our dues, I think, were something like, I know I got $50 a month from my folks. The dues was $32.50, and we had about $12.50 for the month to live on. But everybody was in the same boat. We cut each other's hair. When we went out with the boys from the SAM house and the CPT house, we would come back to the sorority house and fix ice cream sundaes and dance in the parlor, and it was wonderful. It is certainly not the sophisticated life the kids lead today. Everything was formal. Every Friday and Saturday night were formal we went formal. And I went pretty much with Max. The different sorority and fraternity houses would have dances. I went to, in my senior year, I left school. I had enough credits that I left school at noon. And being very ambitious and knowing that I wanted clothes and everything, I went to work on 16th Street, across the street from Goldstein Chapman in the basement. And I can't tell you the name of the dress shop, but they were 2 dresses for $7.99. But it gave me enough money to buy most of the clothes that I needed for my first year at university. After that year, after that year, I went to work for Lena Cohn in the dress department during the summer at Brandeis. And there I was able to get a discount when I bought my clothes. Whenever I came home, whether it was Christmas vacation, whether it was summer vacation, I worked. Then I went to work one summer for Lou Somberg, who had had put in a cotton department down on the lower level of his store. And somehow or other, I got to know some of the men that sold coats. So when they would come to Lincoln, they would call me and I would model a coat or something and get paid for it. And that was really how I bought all my clothes. When I knew that Max and I were going to get married, I should go back and tell you that while Genevieve and I were in grade school, they had a program. Each Friday, a child bringing $1 a week had a bank book. And my sister and I took $1 every week, and that put us through our education at the University of Nebraska for 2 years for me and 2 years for Genevieve. My mother was, I think, wise beyond her years, as was my father. Education, of course, was supermost. Anyway.
Esther, you mentioned those jobs that you had. Do you remember how much money you earned on those jobs?
Yes. I think if I worked all day Saturday, the stores weren't open on Sunday then, Ben. I think maybe $10 at the most. And when you had to take inventory, there was no such thing as any extra pay. You were just glad to do it because somebody else was willing, more than willing to take that job. And of course, I should say that when I left Central High School at noon, I would go and have a cup of coffee at Northrop Jones. I really thought I was big time. But the work was very important to me. It was fun, but it's also an education to learn to work with other people who want to keep that job, which was so important at the time. And whether you were next in line to approach the next customer, they just didn't break your arm, because that showing, was terribly, terribly important. You also learned a respect for clothing. Women would go into the dressing room and try on these 2 dresses for $7.99. You almost knew what people were like. Some would hang the clothes back on hangers, and some would leave a pile for you to pick up and put back on hangers. I also should have mentioned that I went to work at the courthouse before I got married. What was the lady's name that got me the job at the courthouse? She had worked there for years, and I would type case histories. I knew how to type, and I did that when I came out of high school, and after the summer that I worked for Lou at Nadelson's, I was able to get this job. And the reason I mention it was because Harold Cooperman's family lived on about 32nd in Decatur. They had lost their mother. And there were Harold and his 2 sisters. the older sister is the one it will come to me. We used to walk to work. We walked, and she too was working at the courthouse. And the reason she married not Freed. Oh, Helen Gould was the baby sister, and Harold was the middle child, and her name wasn't Pearl, Sybil. And Sybil married a young man, and it escapes me, but I always said it was amazed at what a remarkable family. No money, threadbare. She walked to work. Saturday when she didn't work, she cleaned the house, cooked for her father, and took care of the two children. And Harold also was very enterprising, went to work for Al Wallner over on 52nd and Leavenworth. I always had great respect for them and the way, because my life was different. You know, my dad made a nice living, and though they were Depression years, it's a big difference between living in a home where there was no mother and so many, and two other children and a father to take care of. Anyway, then that really, I should go back and tell you, the Friday and Saturday nights we went formal. Nobody had any money. Everybody was in the same boat. The boys from the SAM house, because that's what Max was, would rent a car, and hard to believe, in our formals and their Texas, 8 of us got into one car. 4 in the front seat, one of the boys holding the girls, and 4 of us in the back seat. We had the best time in the whole world. We thought we really were something special, and it was special. And we all stayed friends. David Goldwar, who just passed away in the last year and a half. Henry Rikus was the biggest devil you ever saw. He was just adorable. And he always was playing pranks on Dave. Do you remember Dave Bernstein? Well, Dave and Max and Henry were very dear friends. And Mickey, who was Mickey Krasny from Fremont, Henry didn't have a special girlfriend, but he loved to play pranks on Max and Dave and Mickey and I. And we came home one Saturday night, and Henry had taken all of Max and Dave Bernstein's clothes, put them in a trunk, and took the 2 trunks over to the sorority house and left them on the on the porch. With no money, we had a ball. But the years were lean. The pride that we had in being able to, we always knew how privileged we were to go to university. You know, it was just something very special, and we knew it. So many of our friends didn't have the opportunity. And to think back at my mother's wisdom and my father's in giving us, it must have been difficult to give us $1 each every week, but well worth it. I don't know whether families would do that sort of thing today. Do you?
I'd like you to tell me about your parents.
Oh, the thing that I always remember, well, my father, nothing ever was good enough. Nothing was ever enough for his wife and 2 children. My mother had help, which was amazing. You know, $3 a week, a woman would come and stay on the place. But everything was for the family. And I think that was typical pretty much of those years. Um, I was a very chubby young lady. My mother always worried about my figure and always made Genevieve and I very self-conscious, and I guess almost to a fault, how we looked. But somehow or other, it always held us in good stead. And the folks were mildly religious. At that time, there was no Bethel. Um, we belonged at the Jewish Community Center. It was the beginning of Bethel, and I remember the wisdom of my grandfather, because my dad had to talk it over with my grandfather. Should they join? Shouldn't they join? And my grandfather said, no, 25th and Seward is not the place for you and your children. You should go someplace more modern. And we went to Bethel. And when I tell you, we walked. We walked from 32nd and Hamilton to 24th and Dodge, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In later years, I would walk home the late afternoon of Yom Kippur, get everything ready for the folks, and then come back and pick them up. One Yom Kippur, my dad walked to 24th and Dodge, and it was raining. And he called my mother when he got to the Jewish Community Center, which is where it was held, and he said to her, you're going to have to call a cab and send me down all fresh clothes. They still wouldn't let me drive. Well, that's the way life was in those days. And my mother led, I think, a very easy life compared to what Mother Canar lived. My dad made a good living, and we were not deprived, as so many of my mother's friends had difficulties. I remember my mother telling a story about Minnie Sherman, who was a beautiful woman. Did you ever know Minnie? And they played cards together. And Mother said Minnie had worn the same dress and had knocked, the elbows had come through, the elbows became holy, and Minnie just darned it up, wore it, and looked like a lovely lady. They were, just remarkable people. A life that, a hardship that I don't think has ever been known since those Depression years. They left a profound impression on me, and to this day, I can't buy it at retail. I have to wait till it's reduced. My mother said you never bought a winter coat before Thanksgiving, and I never have. And I've always told my children to do the same thing. It's all a throwback of how important it was to maintain a standard of self-respect. I don't know that it exists today. I don't know what else.
From
What about
Franklin, where did you go to school, Esther?
Oh, I went to Central High, and I wasn't an outstanding student, and I don't think they were 4 of the happiest years of my life. I was heavy and had a problem with it. I had a very dear friend, Dorothy Friedel. I don't know if you ever knew Leonard Friedel. Well, Dorothy Friedel and her family were my parents' closest friends. And when Rose Friedel died, how innocent we were. Dorothy and I were 16 years old, and when the rabbi said she led a full life, I thought she certainly had. Dorothy and, well, Meyer was a wonderful man. They had the famous store down on 12th and Farnham. Dorothy saw to it too that, and I think Meyer made a good living. They lived on 48th in California, and Dorothy and her sister Bernice and Leonard really were raised from the time they were very young, because their mother was sick for years, by Meyer. Leonard, when he went into when Meyer died, Leonard was underground in the service, and my parents looked all over for him. And the children, they couldn't find him. And Bernice and Dorothy sat Shiva at my folks' place. My folks then lived on 35th in Chicago in a duplex, and they sat Shiva there. Leonard, of course, became very successful, but has since passed away. And Dorothy lives in San Diego. Really, Dorothy was my closest friend in high school. I can't think of anyone that I felt that close to. And I'm trying to think who else. I know we played bridge in high school because I loved playing cards. And I knew Ruth and Naomi Bordy at the, in those years. But I didn't have any real close friends. My friends really started from university. Mickey was Mickey and I were pep girls representing the SDT house in Lincoln, and loved our uniforms, and we had a ball with it. But my high school years were not. I worked on the register and loved that, but couldn't wait till I grew up and went to university. And didn't date a lot. And there was there were two fraternities. What was it called? The Ronos? I think so. I remember going on a sleigh ride out at what was then Highland. There was nothing really there, but it was fun. And I guess we went tobogganing. My happiest years were at the University of Nebraska.
Esther, what kind of work did your father do?
Oh, my father worked for Morton Ironwork on 33rd and Farnham, and then went into business for himself with a man by the name of Wisted. It was called Stein Wisted Motors, right over the bridge in Council Bluffs, and did very well. My father was very arthritic and lived in Rochester. I remember one winter, my dad didn't work at all and really couldn't move. Came home with all this equipment from that Rochester had told him that, to limber his joints. And he had like a metal, it's like armor that had light globes under it. And we lived in this bungalow on 32nd and Hamilton, had a room upstairs. So my dad took all the equipment up there. He was we never really sat down to dinner with my dad. Only maybe on Sunday. When do people come to buy cars? After dinner. I don't know whether I have sufficiently told you, and of course the tragedy of my sister dying in Palm Springs a couple years ago was just really a horrible, horrible incident in my life, because she came on a Friday and was gone by the following Friday. And I had no idea she was that sick, and I'm not sure she did either. Terrible, absolutely terrible.
I'd like to go back and hear about how you met Max and your life together, your marriage and so on.
Oh, I was friendly with a girl by the name of Phyllis Roddy, and she was part Jewish, half Jewish, and she was going, oh, he was such a catch. Well, anyway, somebody, I don't know quite how it happened, but we were both 16, and there was something about a Hadassah thing going to Lincoln. And she said, let's go to Lincoln. I said, okay, and I asked my folks, they said, okay. I think we went down on the bus, and the SAM house was where we were told to go. Well, we walked in with all these boys. We were absolutely swamped. We had the time of our lives. We had a ball. And David Goldware introduced me to Max. That was how I met him. I was a senior in high school because I was 17 when I graduated. My birthday is January 1st. And they came home that summer, and Max and Dave Bernstein and Henry Rikus and David Goldware, they all had dates, and we all went together. I think I knew that summer that probably, if all went well, Max and I would get married. It was just one of those unusual circumstances that you met somebody that young, and though I dated other people, I just wasn't interested. I knew more, crazy world. My mother went with a group of friends whose children all became CBTs. And the fact that I would go with a boy from the SAM house was so demeaning, and they made such fun of my mother. His mother can't even speak English. I just couldn't believe that people could be, I wasn't raised like that, and I couldn't believe that people could be so difficult. And they were nasty. There was such a division and such competition. Where'd you go to school, Ben?
Creighton.
Oh. It was just really great animosity. And of course, I grew up with the boys, Bud Slosberg, Stuart Muskin, Leonard Friedel. They all became CBTs, but I couldn't figure out what difference it made. When the fact that we had this sorority house with 12 very chubby young women, the SAMs always saw to it that those girls had dates every Friday or Saturday night. The CBTs didn't give a damn. They were so arrogant, it was just ridiculous. As I said, my 2 years in university, happiest years of my life. And of course, when Max and I were married, Max didn't get to graduate university. The first year I went to university, Leo Fox, and that was a very close-knit, 2 sisters and 2 brother-in-laws. They had no other relatives. They absolutely did not know the ways of the world. For example, Lou and Max wanted to become Boy Scouts, and Mother and Dad Canar knew nothing about it. So they called down Leo Fox, who was the oracle, and said, should the boys become boys? Oh, well, you don't want your boys to go in the Army. They weren't allowed to be Boy Scouts. When Max told me stories of the folks, they got, my father-in-law went to work at the packing house, hated it. He didn't know that my mother-in-law was putting money aside to send to her family in Poland. When he found out she had a little knipple, he didn't get out of bed for 2 days. And finally, she gave him the money, and that's how he got a horse and wagon. Their lives, it seems to me, were far more interesting than what my life was. You know, they came with such little, with nothing. Mother and Dad Canar came to this country, and they were both about 21 years old. And Mother Canar wanted some member of the family. And Julia Fox was her sister. And so she sent for Julia and Leo. And I don't know how many years it took, but not too many, and they came to live. Leo was far more aggressive than my father-in-law. They both, the two families were so upset when Hitler moved into Poland. And Leo immediately sent for two of his brother's boys who lived someplace in the east, and the two boys came, but somehow or other they weren't happy here, and they stayed not too long and went east. When the war was, when Rabbi Moshowitz was going over to, after the war, the Dad Canar and Leo Fox said to him, "These are our relatives. If you find anybody, bring them." It was tragic. They brought one boy who had really lived in the gutters in Poland and survived in the gutters in Poland. The next thing we knew came Bee and Rudy. I think Bee really, she was a gorgeous girl. Oh, she was just beautiful. They told the story that Bee had been in a brothel. Rudy told me that his sister had been vacationing in Russia and decided she wanted to come back and see her folks in Poland. And he saw his sister picked up off the street and thrown into a burning synagogue. Can you imagine living with that kind of horror? Then came Esther and Esther Silver and what was his name? Anyway, this Esther's husband was my mother and Mother Canar and Julia Fox's nephew. They were all interrelated with one another. They just pleaded, whoever went to Europe, to Germany or to Poland, please, whoever you know, bring them. The reason, I guess, I get so emotional about it, knowing what happened and what they went through. Mother Canar used to say she sinned because she didn't bring them all with her. They were a big family, and then came, when the others came, the officials came, what's his name, who lives in our building, Ben Josen, he went to work for Leo. Rudy went to work for Leo, but they always with the understanding from Dad Canar, if you need money to go in business for yourself, once you learn the business, I'll back you. And he did. He helped them all he could. And they kind of were a Freilich bunch. Bee and Rudy they lived next door to Ethel and Marvin Steinberg over in, around, what was it, around, I'm trying to think what the streets were. They called it Bagel area. And they were fun people, as were the Fleschels. They were just, Helen and her husband went into the nut business. The the uncle that brought Helen and her husband, it was Herman's Nuts, and Mother and Dad Canar were very friendly with that couple, and they all seemed to well, they all did for one another, Ben. It was any of us would have done anything for the heartaches that those people had. When I think back how quickly, well, Rudy and Bee have a son living in Omaha. Did you know him, Ira? With a liver transplant. How proud they would have been. Oh. Ira will just, if he hears of anyone, when my brother-in-law, Mel Bornstein, got sick, my niece Linda Patton contacted him. He would have done anything. I mean, there was no saving Mel, but he remembered the family and would have been more than happy. He gave her whatever advice he could. I didn't know any of the other, so many of the refugees that came, but they all seemed to make their way. And, but somehow or other they didn't have long lives. Whether it was what they lived through, I don't know. But the horror stories were, I had an opportunity to go to Germany, but I just couldn't bring myself to go. It was just too difficult.
Esther, what kind of work did Max do when you first got married?
Oh, because the two Canars, the Canars and the Foxes were so interrelated, Leo had a bleeding ulcer. And no, I have to go back before that. Max and I were in university together, and my father-in-law had a piece of property on, 22nd and N, and what's the street after? It was right next to the Roseland Theater. And all of a sudden, J.C. Penney wanted to build a building there. My brother-in-law Lou was not a businessman. He was a pharmacist. And Mother and Dad Canar said to Max, "You'll have to stay out of school till we get this settled." It was no imposition to them. That's the way it had to be. So from January till September, Max had to stay home. Now at 19, 20 years old, he was bargaining with all these people from J.C. Penney. They built the kind of building that he wanted, that they wanted, and Max did all the negotiating. I don't think there was a lawyer involved. I don't think anybody was involved except Max. Strangely enough, the man, Mr. Cummings, who worked with Max, said to him, "You really should go into the real estate business. That's where you belong." Well, anyway, the building was built. The J.C. Penney was very satisfied with it. The folks were glorious, and Max went back to school. So he went back to school for another year, and Leo Fox had a bleeding ulcer. And my father-in-law said, "Max, you know enough about the furniture business. You'll have to come home and run Leo's business until he's well enough to run it himself." So Max ran Leo's business. It was all a shame. He went back for half a semester. Something else came up, and Leo said to him, "Why don't you just stay and work with me?" Which he did. And Leo was very enterprising. He invested in stocks. He was far more Americanized than Dad Canar ever was. The only progression, I think, of Dad Canar was that Mother Canar was always there to buy another piece of property. And that's how they went on. Well, finally, Max went into business for himself, and unfortunately, it caused not, they remained friends, but it was not the same relationship. Leo never spoke to Max again. After Max had knocked himself out, it was a shame, and we loved the boys, Phil and Al, and we kept a friendship with them. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. Mother Canar died. 1 week later, Phil died. He was to have open heart surgery. They sat Shiva 3 weeks in a row. Al must have died first, then Mother Canar, and then Phil. It was just really awful. And Julia was never consoled. I can't imagine a mother losing 2 sons in 2 weeks and then sitting Shiva for her sister. But there had, like in so many other families, Ben, they're so involved with each other that they become interfering. And really, Mother Canar always said it was true. Max really didn't, he bore the brunt of it. And then Max went into business and did very well. And Lou decided he didn't want to be in the pharmacy on 24th in California. 16th in California, right by the Omaha Potato Market. So Mother Canar said, Max, Lou wants to come in and work with you. So he did. And that was the way it was. There was no arguments. There was no anger. That's the way it was. Max was a smart businessman. And everything that Max did was in buying, the man was right, Mr. Cummings, was in buying property. He bought a building on 10th and Farnham, and I think at the time it was bought so cheap, and then in later years he sold it. He bought a building, and I'll tell you something strange. All the property that the Canars owned, the city came along and bought. And Max said to them the last time when our factory was on 24th and Lake, the old Safeway building. He said, you have taken every piece of property that I buy, and and I lose money because I have to pay. I have to go with the price you request. But that was really where Max made his money. I think at one time there was another building. The amazing thing on about 8th, where you take the turn to go to the airport, was some kind of a supply house. And the Blumkins had it was a warehouse for their carpeting. It was on rollers. And Max had a business on 8th and Farnham. 8th and Douglas? No, I think 8th and Farnham. Anyway, right under the bridge. And there was a fire. And I'll tell you a terrible story. I'm not sure. If you're recording this, I shouldn't tell it. But anyway, it was a very sad state of affairs that ended very well. Max bought the building where they stored the carpeting, where they had their carpeting from Mrs. Blumkin. All there was a handshake. That was her word. You didn't sign anything. And Max waited a long time to go into that building because whatever they were building out where their present location is, they weren't ready to release that building. The building, they moved out, and Max was going to go into that building, and Mr. O'Keefe, who was in the elevator business, said to Max one day, I'm not going to tell you who the people are until later, Max, I understand you sold that building. And Max said, no, I didn't sell that building. He said, well, I saw the lease. And one of our Jewish people rented the building that Mrs. Max had bought from Mrs. B to Renstrom, who had beauty supplies. And the way it ended up, Max called in this man and his two sons and said, how dare you rent this building out from under me? They told him that they owned the building. Anyway, to make a long story short, the lease was such a fabulous lease that Mike had a friend in Chicago who owned a lot of property, and we sent the lease to him. He said it was the finest lease he ever saw in his life. And lucky for Max that Mr. O'Keefe happened to be in the building and checking the elevators. It was a wonderful, wonderful plus for us. Hard to believe that a Jewish man would do that, but he did. And then the boys, when Renstrom took that building and rented it, then the boys moved over to 24th and Lake. And then Max got sick, and that was the end of it. You know, when Max was 40 years old, Ben, our daughter was at Camp Pinemere, and the fathers of the daughters were playing baseball against each other. And so we were all sitting there, all of our friends, Chicky and Stuart. They had a daughter there, and a few other our friends. And when Max slid into base, you know, everybody was just excited, but he couldn't get up. And we found out, well, he finally did get up, and he said, Esther, I can't walk. And so when we came home, we found that he had an occlusion of an artery in his leg. And I was 38, Max was 40, and Max contacted everybody in the United States and finally went to Rochester, where they did a live artery transplant. That's what they were doing in those days. It was a horrible operation. And he was up there for, I think for 3 months. I remember Dad Canar going back and forth, and so did I. And when I went to see Dr. Ivers, I said to him, well, will this cure it? And he said, my dear young lady, don't disillusion yourself. We'll be very lucky if this is just the end of it. Well, within a year, the artery had dried up. And Max went back, and Max found a doctor in Billings, in a place in Billings in Chicago. The man could hardly see, and he felt all the pulses. That's when I learned there were pulses all over your feet, your hands, everywhere. And he said, you know, there's a thing that they're doing called nylon tubing. This was a Lebanese man, and he told Max of what they were doing. So Max went back a few years later and they performed another bypass. It really didn't work too well, and finally he had to have 2 sympathectomies right under the knee to release the blood. So I knew our whole lifestyle changed. I had forgotten about it. He was lucky not to lose the leg. But, you know, it doesn't seem important. But when you can't do what your friends do, when you can't dance, when you can't play golf, it brings about a great change. Tough years. Advice of leaving to my children. The most important thing in life is your own dignity and everybody else's. And that I have left you with the realization that is the way I hope you will always lead your life. I love you all very dearly.